Hey everyone, Razzbowski here, and welcome back to Chapter 2 of the Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Silver Eyes. The door opened only about a foot wide, and they went one by one until they were all through. Inside, the air changed, and they all stopped short. Ahead of them was a dark hallway familiar to them. "Is this?" Jessica whispered, not taking her eyes from the dark expanse. "It's here," Charlie thought. She held out her hand for the flashlight, and John handed it to her wordlessly. She shone the light ahead of them, sweeping the walls. They were covered in children's drawings, crayon on yellowing, curling paper. She started forward, and the others followed, feet shuffling on old tile. It seemed to take forever to traverse the hall, or perhaps it was just that they were moving slowly with methodical, deliberate steps. Eventually the hall opened up into a larger expanse, the dining room. It was just as they had remembered it, completely preserved. The big flashlight bounced off thousands of things, reflective, glittered, or topped with foil ribbon. The tables were still in place, covered in their silver and white checkered cloths. The chairs were all pulled up to them haphazardly, some tables with too many and some with too few. It looked as though the room had been abandoned in the middle of a lunch hour. Everyone had gotten up, expecting to return, but never did. They walked in, cautiously breathing cold, stale air that had been trapped inside for a decade. The whole restaurant gave off a sense of abandonment. No one was coming back. There was a merry-go-round barely visible in the distant corner, with 4 child-sized ponies still at rest from their last song. In an instant, Charlie froze in place, as the other did. They were there. Eyes stared back from the dark, large and lifeless. An illogical panic pulsed through her. Time held still. No one spoke. No one breathed, as though a predatory animal was stalking them. But as the moments passed, the fear waned until she was back again, as a child with her old friends, separated from one another for far too long. Charlie walked towards the eyes in a straight line. Behind her, the others were motionless. Hers were the only footsteps. As Charlie walked, she touched the cold back of an old party chair without looking at it, guiding it out of her path. She took one final step, and the eyes in the dark became clear. It was them. Charlie smiled. "Hi," she whispered, too soft for the others to hear. Before her stood 3 animatronic animals, a bear, a rabbit, and a chicken, all standing tall as adults, maybe taller. Their bodies were segmented like artists' models, each limb made of distinct squarish pieces separated at the joints. They belonged to the restaurant, or maybe the restaurant belonged to them. And there was a time when everybody knew them by name. There was Bonnie the rabbit. His fur was a bright blue, his squared-off muzzle held a permanent smile, and his wide and chipped pink eyes were thick-lidded, giving him a perpetually worn-out expression. His ears stuck up straight, crinkling over at the top, and his large feet splayed out for balance. He held a red bass guitar, blue paws poised to play, and around his neck was a bow tie that matched the instrument's fiery colour. Chica the chicken was more bulky and had an apprehensive look, thick black eyebrows arched over her purple eyes, and her beak slightly open, revealing teeth as she held out a cupcake on a platter. The cupcake itself was somewhat disturbing, with eyes set into its pink frosting and teeth hanging out over the cake, a single candle sticking out the top. "I always expected the cake to jump off the plate." Carlton gave a half laugh and cautiously stepped up to Charlie's side. "They seem taller than I remember," he added in a whisper. "That's because you never got this close as a kid." Charlie smiled at ease and stepped closer. "You were busy hiding under the tables," Jessica said from behind them, still some distance away. Chica wore a bib around her neck with the words, "Let's eat," set out in purple and yellow against a confetti-coloured background, and a tuft of feathers stuck up in the middle of her head. Standing between Bonnie and Chica was Freddy Fazbear himself, namesake of the restaurant. He was the most genial-looking of the 3, giving no hint that he would rather be somewhere else. A robust, if lean, brown bear. He smiled down at the audience, holding a microphone in one paw, sporting a black bow tie and top hat. The only incongruity in his features was the colour of his eyes, a bright blue that surely no bear had ever had before him. His mouth hung open and his eyes were partially closed, as though he had been frozen in song. Colin drew closer to the stage until his knees pressed against the rim of it. "Hey, Freddy," he whispered. "Long time no see." He reached out and grabbed the microphone, wiggling it to see if it could get loose. "Don't!" Charlie blurted, looking up at Freddy's fixed gaze as though making sure he hadn't noticed. Carlin pulled his hand back like he had touched something hot. "Sorry." "Come on," John said, cracking a smile. "Don't you want to see the rest of the place?" They spread out across the room, peering into corners and carefully trying doors, acting as though everything might be breakable to the touch. John went over to the small carousel, and Carlton disappeared into the dark arcade off to the main room. "I remember it being a lot brighter and noisier in here," Carlton smiled as though at home again, running his hands over the aging knobs and flat plastic buttons. "I wonder if my high scores are still in there," he muttered to himself. To the left of the stage was a small hallway. Half hoping no one would notice where she was gone, Charlie started down it silently, as the others occupied themselves with their own curiosities. At the end of the short, plain corridor was her father's office. It had been Charlie's favourite place in the restaurant. She liked to play with her friends in the main area, but she loved the singular privilege of coming back here when her father was doing paperwork. She paused outside the closed door, her hand poised over the knob, remembering. Most of the room was filled with his desk, his filing cabinets, and small boxes of uninteresting parts. In one corner was a smaller filing cabinet painted a salmon colour that Charlie had always insisted was pink. That had been Charlie's. The bottom drawer held toys and crayons, and the top had what she liked to call my paperwork. It was mostly colouring, books and drawings, but occasionally she would go over to her father's desk and try copying down whatever he was writing in a childish crayoned hand. Charlie had tried the door, but it was locked. Better this way, she thought. The office was personal, and she did not really want to open it tonight. She headed back to the main dining room and found John looking pensively at the merry-go-round. He eyed her with curiosity, but did not ask where she had gone. "I used to love this thing," Charlie smiled, approaching warmly, yet now the painted figures seemed odd and lifeless to her. John made a face as though he knew what she was thinking. "Not the same," he said. He rubbed his hand over the top of the polished pony as though to scratch it behind the ear. "Just not the same," he repeated, removing his hand and gazing elsewhere. Charlie glanced over to see where the others were. In the arcade, she could see Jessica and Carlton wandering among the games. The consoles stood still and unlit like massive tombstones, their screens blank. "I never really liked playing the games," Jessica said, smiling. "They moved too fast, and just when I started to figure out what to do, I'd die and it would be someone else's turn," she said as she wiggled a joystick that squeaked from neglect. "They were all rigged, anyway," Carlton said with a wink. "When's the last time you played one of these?" Jessica said, peering closely into one of the screens to see what image was burned into it from too many years of use. Carlton was busy rocking a pinball machine backwards and forwards trying to get a ball to come loose. There's a pizza place I visit sometimes." He set the table back on all fours carefully and glanced at Jessica. "But it's no Freddy's," he added. John was roaming through the dining room again, amidst the tables, flicking the chairs and spirals hanging overhead. He plucked a red party hat from the table, stretched the rubber band hanging loosely from its base, and snapped it around his head, red and white tassels hanging down over his face. "Oh, let's check out the kitchen," he said. Charlie followed as he bounded off towards it. Although the kitchen had been off limits to her friends, she had spent a lot of time there. So much so that the chefs actually chased her out by name, or at least by the name they heard her father call her, Charlotte. John had overheard someone calling her Charlotte one day when they were in kindergarten, and persisted in teasing her with it constantly. He could always get a rise out of her with that. It wasn't that Charlie didn't like her full name, but Charlie was who she was to the world. Her father called her Charlotte, and it was like a secret between them, something no one else was allowed to share. The day she left Hurricane for good, the day they said goodbye, John had hesitated. "Bye, Charlie," he said. In the cards and letters and phone calls, he had never called her Charlotte again. She never asked why, and he never told her. The kitchen was still fully stocked with pots and pans, but it held little interest for Charlie in the midst of her memories. She headed back out into the open space of the dining room, and John followed her. At the same time, Jessica and Carlton stumbled out of the arcade, tripping into each other as they crossed the thresholds between the rooms in the dark. "Anything interesting?" John asked. A gum wrapper, 30 cents, and Jessica. "So, no, not really," Carlton said. Jessica gave him a punch playfully in the shoulder. "Oh, have we all forgotten?" Jessica gave an evil smile, pointing to another hallway on the opposite side of the dining room. She headed toward it swiftly before anyone could answer, and they followed her. The hallway was long and narrow, and the further they went, the less flashlights seemed to illuminate. At the end of the passage, it opened out into a small room for private parties, set up with its own tables and chairs. As they entered, there was a collective hush. There, in front of them, was a small stage, the curtain drawn. A sign was strung out across the front. "Out of order." It read in neat handwritten letters. They stood there for a minute. Then Jessica went up and poked the sign. 10 years later and it's still out of order," she said. "Don't touch it," Charlie thought. "I had one birthday back here," John said. "It was out of order then too." He took hold of the edge of the curtain and rubbed the glittered fabric between his fingers. "No," Charlie wanted to say again, but stopped. "You're being silly, Charlie," she chided herself. "Do you think he's still back there?" Jessica said playfully, threatening to make the reveal with one giant swing of the curtain. "I'm sure he is." John gave a false smile, seemingly uncomfortable for the first time. "Yes, he's still there," Charlie thought. She stepped back cautiously, suddenly becoming aware of the drawings and posters surrounding them like spiders on the wall. Charlie's flashlight carefully inched from picture to picture, all depicting different variations of the same character. A large and energetic pirate fox with a patch over one eye and a hook for a hand, usually swinging in to deliver a pizza to the hungry children. "This is the room where you were the one hiding under the tables," Jessica said to Charlie, trying to laugh. "But you're a big girl now, right?" Jessica climbed up onto the stage unsteadily, almost losing her footing. John reached out a hand to steady herself as she righted herself. She giggled nervously, looking down at the others as though for guidance, then grabbed a hold of the tasseled edge of the fabric. She waved her other hand in front of her face as the dust fell from the cloth. "Maybe this isn't a good idea," she laughed, but there was an edge to her voice, like she really meant it, and she looked down at the stage for a moment, as though poised to clamp back down. Still, she didn't move, taking the edge of the curtain again. "Wait," John said. "Can you hear that?" They were all dead quiet, and in the silence Charlie could hear them all breathing. John's breaths were deliberate and calm, Jessica's quick and nervous. As she thought about it, her own breathing began to feel odd, like she'd forgotten how to do it. I don't hear anything," she said. "Me neither," Jessica echoed. "What is it?" "Music. It's coming from..." He gestured back the way they had come. "From the stage." Charlie cocked her head to the side. "I don't hear it. It's like a music box," he said. Charlie and Jessica listened carefully, but the blank expressions didn't change. "It stopped, I guess." John returned his gaze forward. "Maybe it was an ice cream truck," Jessica whispered. "Hey, that wouldn't be so bad right now." John appreciated the levity. Jessica turned her attention back to the curtain, but John began to hum a tune to himself. "It reminded me of something," he mumbled. "Okay, here I go," Jessica announced. She did not move. Charlie found her eyes drawn to Jessica's hand on the curtain, her pink manicured nails pale against the dark, glittery fabric. It was almost like the hushed moment in a theatre crowd when the lights go dark but the curtain has not risen yet. They were all still, all anticipating, but they were not watching a play, no longer playing a game. All the mirth had gone out of Jessica's face. Her cheekbones stood out stark in the shadows, and her eyes looked grim, as though the simple thing she was about to do might be a terrible consequence. As Jessica hesitated, Charlie realized her hand hurt. She was making a fist so tight her nails had dug into her flesh, but she could not force her grip to loosen. A crash sounded from back the way they came. A cascading, clanging noises rang out and filling the whole space. John and Charlie froze, meeting each other's eyes in sudden panic. Jessica dropped the curtain and leapt off the stage, bumping into Charlie and knocking the light out of her hands. "Where's the way out?" she exclaimed, and John came over to help. They hurriedly searched the walls, and Jessica chased the light beam spiraling across the floor.